so I'm Andy Beverley, as it says on the slide there. I'm going to talk about a couple of modules that I've kind of written the modules, but they're built on another module called log reports, which I'm not the author of, but they're included in the main distribution. So it's a sort of combined effort between me and the author of log report, which is Mark Overmere. What I'm going to do is just talk about. I was using Dancer for sort of a year or so, and I just found when I was writing my first applications that there wasn't really a sort of comprehensive way of managing all my messages to both the system and to the user, and sort of managing errors. There's sort of ways to do each of those bits, but I wanted a sort of more joined up way, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. In fact, has everybody used Dancer here in this room? Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, I kind of assumed from the title that you would, but I just wanted to check. Obviously, I'm going to assume that you've used Dancer. I actually did this talk at the Dancer conference, and I thought it was worthwhile doing it again here, as I already had it prepared. So like I say, I'm going to talk about how we combine those messages. Obviously, most of the time you're going to want messages to either be for a user or for the system, but you maybe want to manage them together. I'm going to, as the title says there, why we want to do this, because it can just be quite cumbersome otherwise. I wanted a way of easily catching user errors and reporting those to the user without lots of complicated if-else type statements. Like it says, as we all do, I wanted to keep the code to an absolute minimum because none of us like writing repetitive code. There's two modules, as you saw from the title slide. You can, in theory, use them separately, but they're really designed to be used together. So I'm going to talk about them both separately, but like I say, I would expect you to use them together. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the actual logging engine, the log report logging engine. Just a quick recap of how Dancer logging works, as I'm sure you know. So you've got your 5 Dancer keyword functions there to do actual logging. I'm sure you've all seen those. And that works great. So when you call one of those Dancer logging keywords, it sends your particular logging message to one of the logging engines within Dancer, and that gets reported as required. And that's fine to a degree, but actually I found it was a bit limiting because if nothing else, all your modules then have to rely on Dancer in order to use those keywords. Which might not be an issue if you're doing a small app, but actually if you're pulling in other modules from elsewhere in your code base, that might become a problem. So that's one of the first disadvantages that I want to mention, really. So what you can do is rather than you can still use those keywords within your Dancer application, but there's other ways of achieving that logging, which I'm going to talk about now. So the first thing you might want to do is use the log report logging engine. So instead of using, so you know how you configure your logger in your Dancer configuration file, the very first and most simple thing you can do is just specify the logging engine as the log report logging engine. And as it says there, by default, that behaves exactly the same as the default Dancer logging engine. So you don't win anything there, but you do have some built-in additional flexibility. So the first advantage you've got is by using the log report logging engine, you then get access to all the log report engines. They're not called engines; they're called dispatchers. But effectively, you've then instantly got access to a whole load more bunch of logging engines. And just to give a few examples, you've got a syslog, a file as you do in Dancer, log for Perl or a callback function. And like I say, they're called dispatchers. So you would add in your one log report logging engine into Dancer, into your configuration file, and then within the configuration for that, you'd say which of the log report dispatches you want to use. For example, any of those listed there. And so that gives you access to the normal Dancer logging keywords that we spoke about on the last slide. It also gives you access to some additional logging levels as per what is available in log report, and I'll summarise those on the next slide. I'll talk a bit more about dispatches in due course, but in the simplest terms, you can configure dispatches to work in different ways. I suppose a little bit like you can configure your Dancer logging engines to work in different ways. So you can filter them differently in terms of which messages you want to see. You can say how you want their format to be, and other options depending on what the dispatcher is. Feel free to chip in with any questions, by the way, as we go along. That's quite fine. So these are all the log report logging keywords. You might think, well, that's quite a lot, and it is quite a lot, but actually it can be quite useful. And I think one of the key things I want to point out here is that some of these logging levels, so that's the most verbose at the top and the least at the bottom, also the least severity at the top and the most severity at the bottom. I think one of the things I should point out here is that actually there's some similar login levels, but ones that are, some are designed for a user message and some are designed for a system message. And a good example of this is the warning and mistake keywords. So if you give a warning message in your application, that's in your code. That's generally something that you're going to want to send to a system administrator. If you give a mistake message within your application, that's probably something that's going to want to be displayed to the end user. So just by changing which ones of these you use, you can, and there's no hard, you can configure all this if you need to. There's no, you can sort of imply as to where you want these messages to go. And I'll give some more examples of those as we go on. In the plugin, in the Dancer plugin, it's got all the standard log report login levels, as you can see there, plus one additional one, which is the green one. And that's because there wasn't one that fitted that within the main log report module, and that was a success. So just when you want to tell the user that something's worked. Okay, so I've talked about the logging module, and I'm now going to talk about the actual plugin. So the plugin gives the real meat on the bones. There's some sort of real useful stuff that you might want to use in here. So first of all, and again, I'll give some example code as we go on, but actually there's very little code to put in here. All you need to do is as it says there, just use the plugin, and by using the plugin, you get some fairly sane defaults to your application, which will do things such as provide those additional keywords that I had on the last page. And by default, out of the box, it saves all the messages into a session variable, which are then automatically sent to your template. So just by using that plugin, you can automatically call one of the messaging keywords, such as notice, and straight away so I've said there, in fact, very poorly haven't changed that to LPW. I've given an example message there that at the notice level that I want to send to the user, and that will automatically be sent to my template when it's rendered. So I don't have to worry about adding additional code into my application. As I said in the sort of introduction to, or the précis of this talk, it's not difficult to do these things. It's just boring and tedious. So you don't have to worry about code in there to send that message at some point to your template to then be rendered. All you have to do is call that. So 2 lines of code there, and I've got a message automatically sent to my web page, and I'll show on the next slide how we display that. Just a point on this middle one here, without wishing to go into too much detail, there's some dependency issues on using this, which if you haven't already used it in another module, you'll end up with errors. So you have to import it. If you haven't already used it, you have to import it with no. You have to use the module without importing any keywords. As it says, they're not always needed, but certainly no harm in putting it in. So on the code there, that's what you'd have in your normal route. And like I say, that will automatically be sent to your template, and this might be how, obviously it's up to you how you then render that on your template page, but here's a good example. So I put this code in all of my applications in one of the layouts, just at the top there. I always use Bootstrap. Obviously, you don't have to, but there's a good example here of using Bootstrap. And it's automatic. All those messages automatically go into a messages variable in the template, so I don't have to worry about passing that in. And I just loop through them and display them all. The actual message that's passed in isn't a simple string; it's actually an object, so you can do various stuff with it. At the minute, that object is fairly limited. It's only got a couple of functions in there, but I'm obviously happy to look at adding more in if you find those useful. The point being that it's nice and extensible because it's an object. One of the functions it has got in is an ability to display a suitable Bootstrap colour. So as you've seen now, I've put that into a Bootstrap div, and I call the Bootstrap colour function on the message, and that will display the colour. So straight away, with all the code you've seen, that's a couple of lines in the main root handler and a fairly small number of lines in the template. I've automatically colour-coded my messages and sent those messages into my template without any more code. The message itself does stringify by default, but that then turns the whole of the template from a string into an object, which then causes errors with Dancer because it's not expecting an object in return. So you have to just force it into a string by using the toString function there in that example.
Sorry, can't you just use a overload that will automatically stringify there?
So say again?
Can it not have a auto overload?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, in fact, it does actually. So I suppose you put it in quotes and force it to. Sorry, but I guess what I'm saying is that if you just if I was to put that without the toString, it will by default overload to a string. Yeah. But the problem is well, in fact, it won't overload to a string. It'll actually overload the whole template into a log report message object, which would then stringify. So it would work fine, but then Dancer checks what comes back from the template. If it didn't check and just sent it straight to the output of the browser, it would work fine. But it does check. It sees it's got an object, because obviously there's certain things you can do with returning types of objects from routes, and then it says, you've given me an object when I'm expecting a string, even though it stringifies. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I guess it's just a way of working around Dancer's cleverness, if you like. So yeah, I guess if you put it into quotes, it would stringify as well. So. Okay, so what I've talked about now is the background logging engines for normal routine application messages. I've talked about sending messages to the screen just by using simple keywords. I'm now going to talk about handling errors. So these sort of all tie in. And like I said at the beginning, these are things that you can do, but they tend to be sort of treated separately, which just gets a bit confusing. So I'm going to talk about how I now handle errors for my users. And there's a number of techniques to do that. Here's a couple of examples. I'm sure you've got your own ways of doing it. Some people like to return errors from a subroutine, or they like to return a true and a false, and then they pass the error back in a separate variable. That's one way of doing it. It's a bit messy in my opinion. Another way I used to do it is to use die and then eval the functions as required. So for example, if I had an update function, maybe to update a user's details, I found that they'd done something like missed their email address out, then I would die from that function, and then I'd catch that in my application. I used to use an exception handling module called Ouch. I don't know whether anybody's come across that, which was quite good. I used to do something like this. This should be fairly self-explanatory code. So I used to just die from my function. I'd catch that within my root handler, and then if I found that it was returning an error, then I would display that appropriate error. And again, that works fine, but it was too much code for my liking, to be honest. So, like I said, that's just a couple of examples how you might have done it. I want to talk about how I do it with this module, which is as such. What I do is I use, all those keywords we talked about, all those different messages, there's one called error. Error is a fatal error, but it's designed to be displayed to users. So remember I talked about messages that go to user, messages that go to system. Normally, when you die or you raise an exception, the chances are it's a program error. But actually, with the error keyword, it's designed to halt execution, but in a clean manner, such that it tells the user that they're doing something wrong. So all you have to do is use the error keyword. Is the first thing. If you just do that on its own, it'll handle the error quite cleanly. It'll pass that error into your template using the method that we saw earlier, and it will forward the user to the home page. So by default, sort of reasonably, not particularly user-friendly, but a reasonably clean way of handling the error. What you can do is you can use a keyword instead of that to handle it a little bit more cleanly. You can use a keyword called process, which is basically the same as an eval, but it's expecting these errors. I'll give an example in a second. As it says there, it's a bit like an eval, but then we don't need to worry about the message handling because it'll do that all automatically. A minimal code, which is what we're aiming at. So here's an example. This function here might return an error, a user error, using the error keyword. So we then catch that using the process. Process will return true or false, depending on whether that was successful. If it was successful, it returns true, and then we can just use the success keyword to display the user a message saying that worked really well. If it wasn't successful, I don't need to worry about any of the code because that message will already have been handled, already been sent to the template, and will already be displayed. And even though that was a fatal exception, the process will have caught that. So yes, we'll get to this part of the code here, and we'll be running this code regardless. But by using that sort of if-else statements, we can then handle the code accordingly. So I guess the beauty of that, which I like, is that you can send all sorts of messages back without having to worry about passing them back in a variable and get those automatically sent to the user. Or if it's all worked okay, then we can just send a success message. So that's all the code that I tend to put for my average post-submission in a web application. This is a little bit more of an in-depth example. I'm not got that much time left, so I won't go through it in detail. But this is a whole route. But a very similar technique as to what I spoke about on the last slide. I get my current settings. I see whether the user's posted in any new settings. If they have, I set them. I then try writing them using this write function. If that's worked, then I send a success message. If it hasn't, I know that the error's already been sent to the user, and then I just call my template as normal. And that is sort of the way that I do all of my routes. I know there's want to get into too much details. There's obviously better ways of doing this in Dancer. There's new ways of catching up params, but I'm not going to go into that now. I just thought I should mention that seeing as it's on the screen. And then the final thing that the module will do for you is it'll handle application exceptions cleanly, so unexpected exceptions, I suppose. I find I get these quite a lot. I don't know whether I'm alone in that, but I find I'll roll some code out to production. Maybe I don't test it well enough, but I do occasionally get exceptions that I'm not expecting. I don't want those to be displayed to the user. I also don't want the user to get a horrible 500 message. So this code will automatically handle that cleanly, and I'll give a demo of that in a second. And it takes its prompt off the show errors keyword. If that's set to 0, it shows the user a generic message just saying an unexpected error has occurred. If that's, because obviously we don't want to show them the specific code exception, if that's turned to 1, like you'd have in a development environment, then it'll show you the actual error message that's happened. Okay, so I'll sort of rattle through that. What I'll do is I'll give a quick demo, so hopefully give an idea of how this works in real life. So yeah, standard Dancer template. I've put the Bootstrap theme on top of that. Obviously, you don't have to. And there we go. We've all seen that before. That's all very nice. Right, the first thing I'm going to do is add in just a simple message. So in my home route, I'm just going to add in a notice. So as you see there, all I've done is add in that notice keyword. I refresh the page. That's automatically appearing in a nice blue banner. It's defaulted to blue because it's a notice. The next thing I can do is add a warning. Actually, you'd normally use you can filter these differently. You'd normally use a mistake for a user warning. And again, so just one keyword, and that's automatically color coded and sent it to the page in a nice yellow warning color. The next thing I'm just going to do, so that's just sending simple messages. Next thing I'm going to do is go to what might be a settings page. Again, I've automatically had that display some default errors or some default messages, but I've also got a submit button on there. So by default, and the code in the background here is exactly what I showed on the previous slides. So if I hit submit, that was successful, and I get a nice successful message in a nice green colour. And if, just to give an example, if I wanted to say actually they've done some sort of error, all I have to do is put that one. Can you see that? If I want to call an error, obviously that would normally be a lot more complicated code. If I just want to call, say that they've done something wrong, all I have to do is call that one error. I don't need to worry about returning because that's a fatal exception, so it'll automatically fall straight out of that function. I can have a whole load more code after that with lots more checks, and that will automatically handle that. So if I save that, do exactly what I did before, which is submit the form. It goes back to the same page because I've caught the error. And this time I've got the nice red box with telling me that I've got an invalid email address. And then finally what might happen is you might actually not have your application set up. So you'll see I've used in the bottom here, in the post, I've used the process keyword. If I haven't got that set up, in fact I won't do it, if I haven't got that set up, it'll automatically forward back to the home page with that error. Obviously you'd normally want to catch it, but just in case you put that keyword in code somewhere where it's not caught. And then the final thing I want to show in the demo is I might do something stupid. So the code there is going to cause a Perl exception, as you can see. If I then do that, so that wouldn't be expected. That's in the get route. I get the sort of fairly user-friendly unexpected error has occurred. Obviously it's still not great, but at least it's been handled cleanly. It's forwarded back to the home page. Now the beauty of this is that so we talked about dispatchers at the beginning. Dispatchers can send messages in different formats. The dispatcher that's sending the message to the user has translated that into a generic unexpected error has occurred. But actually, back in my other dispatchers, and you'll see this in the code that's running in the background, for the dispatcher that's being used to display this to the standard out and standard error, I'm getting the full exception on a backtrace. And of course, that could be a syslogger. So, with just some simple little bit of code, I've handled that all nice and cleanly. I can see what's happened. I can go through that. I can fix the bug, tell the user, and hopefully that won't happen again. Okay, I've almost run out of time, but I'll just. I think all I'll say is that there's a lot more to it than that. You can do translations into different languages. You can do all sorts of clever stuff into the way you send messages into different dispatchers. You can format them in different ways. I found you can pretty much do anything you want, and it's really, really flexible. So, like I said, I'm not going to go into all those details now. There's quite a lot of good stuff on the in the Dancer2 plugin log report documentation. There's lots of examples in there, and if you're interested, I would just have a look through those in slow time, really. So I won't talk about that just because I've not got much time, and I'll just finish with a few final points, really. I talked then just about the syslogger where I catch those exceptions. As you may know, you can, with rsyslogd anyway, you can set that up to send email notifications for messages above a certain level. So what I do is I say if it's above a certain level, a certain severity, which those messages will be, then send me an email. So what happens if I've got a production server, an unexpected error happens with that, the user will get that nice clean message, and I'll get an email with the full stack trace telling me what went wrong, which I can then look into. So I know. So normally the user phones me up, and actually I'm already on the case, so that's great. I've mentioned dispatcher format. Dispatchers are global, so you can use those throughout the entire application, even if you're pulling into the modules. But the only downside of that is they are global, so you can't have different ones for different Dancer apps, which I don't know whether you would want to do that anyway, but I just mention it anyway. And finally, the log report itself is a fairly, I consider, fairly lightweight module. It's not too intrusive in terms of including that with the modules, but there is actually a log report minimal as well if you want to include even less code in a module. What that will do is with very little code, it'll handle errors normally using those keywords, and then if there happens to have been the log report module loaded, then it will use the full functionality of log report. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you can get all this functionality without, I consider anyway, without a huge amounts of additional overhead to your application. And finally, there's ways of doing your DVIC logging. Again, examples in the documentation. So yeah, that's fairly whistle-stop tour. There's lots more that it'll do, and that's it. Yeah, any questions?
I just passed the remark that you formatted that very well. It was very well structured.
Oh, cool, thank you. That's the second time. The first time I did a 40-minute talk, and I think I just covered way too much, and just probably confused people. So hopefully I haven't confused you too much.
This was sweet. Well done.